So, about 3 years ago during summer, I had this habit of staying up late playing games with my window wide open. The warm night breeze was nice, and my neighborhood was usually so quiet that it felt like I had the whole world to myself. But one night, around midnight, everything changed. I was deep into a game, headphones on, when I heard it. A knock on my window. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe a branch, but then it happened again, louder this time. I paused my game, pulled off my headphones, and listened. That's when I heard it. A voice, faint and desperate, calling out in Spanish. Ayuda, por favor. Ayuda. Now I'm not fluent in Spanish, but I know enough to understand when someone's asking for help. My heart started racing. I peeked out the window, but it was pitch black outside, and I couldn't see anyone. My family was still up, so I figured maybe it was one of our neighbors in trouble. I grabbed my phone, slipped on some shoes, and headed outside, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. As soon as I stepped into the yard, I saw her. At first, I thought it was a young boy. She was small and hunched over, her clothes torn and dirty, her feet bare. But as I got closer, I realized it was a woman, probably in her late 20s or early 30s. Her eyes were wide, darting around like she was being watched, and she kept whispering, Ayuda, Ayuda, over and over. I tried to talk to her, using the little Spanish I knew, but she just shook her head, clearly not understanding me. She looked terrified, like she'd been through hell and back. I ran back inside to get my parents. They came out with me, and we tried to figure out what was going on. My mom offered her some water, but the woman was too shaken to drink. She kept glancing over her shoulder like she expected someone to jump out of the shadows at any moment. My dad suggested we call my uncle, who's fluent in Spanish, to help translate. While we waited for him to get on the phone, I couldn't stop staring at her. Her hands were trembling, and there were bruises on her arms. Whatever had happened to her, it wasn't good. When my uncle finally got on the line, he started talking to her, and her story came pouring out. She said she was from Honduras and had been kidnapped by human traffickers. She'd managed to escape, but they were still looking for her. She needed to get to Los Angeles, where she had family who could help her, but she didn't have any money or a way to get there. She begged us for $500 for a car, anything to help her get away. My parents and I exchanged looks. We wanted to help, but $500 was a lot of money, and we didn't have a car to spare. We offered to call the police, but she panicked, shaking her head violently. No policia, no policia, she kept saying. She was convinced that if the police got involved, the traffickers would find her and take her back. We didn't know what to do. My parents and I went back inside to talk it over. We were all in shock. This wasn't something that happened in our quiet little neighborhood. After a few minutes, we decided that calling the police was the only option, even if she didn't want us to. But before we could make the call, my mom and I went back outside to check on her. That's when we saw it. A car creeping down our street with its headlights off. It moved slowly, like it was searching for something, or someone. My mom grabbed my arm, and we both froze. The car stopped right in front of our house, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. Then, without a word, we bolted back inside, locking the door behind us. We waited, hearts pounding, peeking out the window to see if the car was still there. After what felt like forever, it finally drove off, disappearing into the night. When we went back outside, the woman was gone. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. We searched the yard, the street, even the neighbors' properties, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she'd never been there at all. We called the police and filed a report, but they didn't seem too concerned. They took down the details, asked a few questions, and that was it. We never heard anything more about her. No updates, no news, nothing. To this day, I have no idea what happened to that woman. Did she make it to LA? Did the traffickers find her? Or did she just disappear into the night, still running, still searching for safety? After that night, I stopped leaving my window open. Every time I hear a noise outside, I can't help but think of her. It reminds me that the world isn't as safe as it seems. It was one of those sweltering summer nights where the air feels heavy, and the only relief comes from the open windows letting in whatever breeze they can catch. I was home alone with my 2-year-old, who was finally asleep after what felt like hours of bedtime battles. 7 months pregnant, I was exhausted, my body aching in ways I didn't even know were possible. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels almost too loud, if that makes sense. You know, when every creak of the floorboards or rustle of the trees outside seems to echo in your ears. I was sitting on the couch, trying to muster the energy to clean up the toys scattered across the living room, when I heard it, a knock on the back door. At first I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was just the wind or a branch tapping against the house. But then it came again, louder this time, more deliberate. My heart started to race, and I felt that primal instinct kick in, the one that tells you something isn't right. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly made my way to the kitchen, where the back door was. The blinds were drawn, but I could see the outline of someone standing there through the thin slats. My hand trembled as I reached for the edge of the blind, pulling it back just enough to peek outside. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a man standing there, but he wasn't just any man. He was covered in blood. So much blood that I couldn't even tell his race or hair color. His face was a mess of red and swollen flesh, and his clothes were torn and stained. He looked like he'd been through hell and back. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled backward, my mind racing. Who was he? What had happened to him? And why was he at my door? I didn't even think about opening the door. My first instinct was to protect my child and my unborn baby. I ran to the landline phone, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely dial 911. When the operator answered, I was hysterical, barely able to get the words out. "There's a man at my door. He's covered in blood. I don't know what to do. Please, send someone, please." I gave them my address, and they assured me that help was on the way. I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, frozen, listening for any sound from the back door. But it was silent now, eerily silent. I grabbed my 2-year-old from his crib, not caring if I woke him up, and locked us in the bathroom. It was the only room in the house with a lock on the door, and I wasn't taking any chances. I sat on the floor, clutching my son to my chest, and waited. The minutes felt like hours. Every sound, the creak of the house settling, the rustle of the trees outside, made my heart pound even harder. I kept imagining the man breaking in, finding us, and I couldn't shake the image of his bloodied face from my mind. Finally, I heard the sirens. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The police arrived quickly, and I could hear them moving through the house, checking every room. I stayed in the bathroom, too scared to come out until they gave the all-clear. When they finally did, I emerged, still trembling, and told them everything. They searched the property, but there was no sign of the man. No blood, no footprints, nothing. It was like he had vanished into thin air. The officers tried to reassure me, saying it was possible he had wandered off, or that I had imagined the whole thing. But I knew what I saw. I wasn't crazy. They left after a while, telling me to call if I saw or heard anything else. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I locked all the doors and windows, grabbed the biggest knife from the kitchen, and locked myself in the bedroom with my son. I didn't sleep that night. Every little noise had me on edge, and I kept replaying the image of the man in my mind, wondering who he was and what had happened to him. The next morning, I heard the sound of sirens again. This time, they weren't coming for me. I looked out the window and saw police cars and an ambulance parked in the yard next door. My stomach dropped. I watched as the paramedics brought out a stretcher with a man on it. The same man I had seen at my door the night before. He was unconscious, his face still a mess of blood and bruises. I later found out from the neighbors that he had been beaten up over a bad drug deal and had somehow ended up in their yard, unconscious and barely alive. I never found out how he ended up at my door that night or why he had come to me for help. Maybe he was disoriented. Maybe he thought I could help him. Or maybe it was just a coincidence. but I'll never forget the fear I felt that night. The way my heart raced, the way my hands shook, the way I held my son so tightly, praying that we would be safe. It's a feeling that stays with you, that changes you. Even now, years later, I still get a chill down my spine when I think about it. At the time of this experience, I was a 16-year-old boy who was in a band. I had to take a long bus ride around 5 p.m. to get to band practice. It was just another day, or so I thought. The bus ride was uneventful at first, but things took a turn for the worse when I realized the bus was going in the wrong direction. By the time I figured it out, it was too late. The bus dropped me off in the middle of nowhere, and I was left standing there, staring at the empty road as the bus drove away, leaving me in complete silence. I pulled out my phone to check the directions, hoping I could still make it to band practice. The map showed that I was miles away from where I needed to be, but I decided to walk anyway. It was already getting dark, and where I live, night falls quickly. The road ahead was pitch black, with no streetlights or houses in sight. I started walking, my footsteps crunching on the gravel, the only sound breaking the eerie silence. The air was cool, and I could feel the dampness of the mud beneath my shoes as I trudged along. I kept checking my phone, hoping I was going the right way, but the further I walked, the more isolated I felt. After about 30 minutes of walking through mud and random roads, I finally reached a point where I could see the highway in the distance. The only way to get to band practice was to cross it, but as I got closer, I realized how dangerous it was. Cars were speeding by, their headlights cutting through the darkness like lasers. There was no way I was crossing that death trap. I turned around, feeling a mix of frustration and fear. I was already late, and it didn't seem worth it to keep going. I called a friend to pick me up and take me home. As I was talking to them, trying to explain where I was, something happened that made my blood run cold. A silver or green car, it was hard to tell in the dark, drove past me. It pulled up a bit behind me and then suddenly turned off all its lights, inside and out. I thought it was strange, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe they were lost too, I thought. I didn't mention it to my friend on the phone. But then, I noticed something even more unsettling. One of the people in the car snapped a photo of me. The flash on their phone lit up the darkness, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would they take a picture of me? My mind started racing, but I tried to stay calm. My friend told me where they were going to pick me up, and I started heading in that direction. As soon as I began to move, the car turned its lights back on and drove away. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I didn't want to stick around to find out. I reached the pickup spot and waited, still on the phone with my friend. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I've always been a bit paranoid, always thinking of every possible outcome, and this situation was no exception. I wasn't about to become a missing persons case. I decided to hide in a bush nearby, just to be safe. As I crouched there, trying to stay as quiet as possible, I saw the same car come back up the road. It drove past me, then turned around and came back down. My heart was racing now, and I could feel the sweat on my palms. The car stopped not far from where I was hiding, and 3 men got out. I ended the call with my friend, not wanting to make any noise. The men started searching the bushes, calling out to me in sing-song voices that sent shivers down my spine. "We're gonna find you. Come out, little boy," they taunted. I was terrified, shaking like a leaf, trying to control my breathing so they wouldn't hear me. They were searching the bushes opposite me, and I thanked God they hadn't found my hiding spot yet. I could hear their footsteps getting closer, their voices growing louder. My mind was racing, trying to think of what I would do if they found me. I had no weapons, no way to defend myself. All I could do was stay still and hope they wouldn't see me. The minutes felt like hours as they continued their search, their voices echoing in the darkness. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, another car slowly started coming up the road. The men froze, then quickly dashed back to their car and drove off. I stayed hidden, not daring to move until I was sure they were gone. I was silently crying at this point, the fear and adrenaline overwhelming me. The car that had scared them off turned out to be my friend, coming to pick me up. I climbed out of the bush, my legs trembling, and got into the car. My friend could see how shaken I was, but I didn't say much. I just wanted to get home. I made it back safe and sound, but I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if those men had found me. The thought of it kept me up at night. And even now, years later, I still get chills when I remember that night. It was a close call, too close for comfort. That night taught me to trust my instincts and to always be aware of my surroundings. So it was around 12 to 1 p.m., and during that time I got around 2 scam calls. Obviously I declined them both, but then when it got to the third one, I had it. I answered, ready to crash out on whoever kept calling me, but as soon as I said hello, I started hearing a woman's cries. I responded, "Are you okay?" And keep in mind, I do not know this person, but I also couldn't help but notice how it sounded like someone I knew. I couldn't pinpoint it though, because they just sobbed and sobbed before they finally responded, "Pick me up," over and over. By now, I'm just wondering if they knew they were calling the wrong number, so I asked, "Who are you?" And they responded quite quickly, "You know who I am. Please, pick me up." I was worried as hell, and if I'm being honest, the number looked oddly like it could be from a school, but I doubted it. Then I said, "I think you have the wrong number," and they said, "No, please, just pick me up." I was about to hang up, but I was already uncomfortable and had this gut feeling that maybe this person was in trouble. What if they were missing? I know it sounds stupid to think that way, but who wouldn't have thought that with a woman crying and saying things like that? So I asked again, "Are you okay?" They cried for a good couple of minutes without saying anything, and after that, they hung up. I turned off my phone and was just flat out uncomfortable. All the hairs on my body were standing up, and I got up to check if my door was locked, which definitely didn't help. I kept thinking, what could have gotten that woman to frantically call someone? Probably their parents, yet accidentally call me? They never called back, so I couldn't tell if they were okay or what to make of it. The whole thing left me feeling uneasy for the rest of the day, and even now I can't shake the sound of her voice. It's like it's stuck in my head, you know? That desperate, pleading tone. I don't know who she was or what happened to her, but I hope she's okay. Whatever it was, it felt off, like something wasn't right. And honestly, I don't think I'll ever forget that call.